Good evening. Happy Monday. How y'all doing? It is Monday, April the 3rd. And got a few minutes. So let me holler at y'all for a few minutes. See who wants to talk, who's around on this beautiful Monday. What's going on? Talk to me. Who do we have? Sorry, let me adjust my camera. There we go. It's a little better. Oh, let's see. Give me a shout out. Who? I see we got one person here. About to go live. It was a nice day earlier, and then now it's a little overcast. So, sometimes I think in advance about, I want to talk about this, and then sometimes it's literally just as I'm getting ready to leave, the idea kind of hits me of like, what do I want to talk about? And like I said, these are all the thoughts that tend to run through my head. You guys just get to be privy to those thoughts as I'm driving around. I'm over in Southeast DC for a few minutes right now, and it's funny as I look around Southeast DC and the growth that's taken place here. It's phenomenal. It's ridiculous just how much things have changed in Southeast DC since I moved to the Metro DC area, or as they call it, the DMV, which stands for, DC, Maryland, Virginia area. But it's about to drive. I think today was opening day for the Washington Nationals, and I think the game was earlier this afternoon, so I guess it was nice before. So it's kind of a little overcast. Looks like it's about to rain on us. But it's just another thing that made me sit there and think about, like, how do you judge? The title of this, of course, is, I judge politicians' ideologies and policies according to their results. And you should also, or you should too, I guess is what I typed, but also too means the same thing. But yeah, it's an interesting thing how when you have conversations with people and they promote these different ideologies, or they talk about this politician or these policies, I always look and say, so what has it produced? And once again, I tell you, I always go back from, I always come from a biblical mindset on things. I reference that all the time. And one of the things I talked about is being a fruit inspector, right? What bears good fruit? Hopefully I don't lose my signal as I cut through this 395 tone. If it does, it'll come right back. So bear with me if my signal gets weak here for a second. But yeah, looking at what are the fruits of something. I mean, doesn't that seem to make sense to you that you should judge by results? I wrote an article on the Unhyphenated America page, I don't know, about 2-3 years ago, and I was talking about POTUS 44, or referencing him, and I was pointing out, I was like, if he were the head coach of your favorite sports team, you would have fired him. I mean, point blank, period. No matter how much you liked him, he could have been a fan of yours, but you cared more about your team, right? You're a fan. I mean, like, I'm a long-suffering Detroit Lions fan, and I care about the Detroit Lions. I want them to do well, so I don't care who's the head coach. I don't care who's the general manager. I don't even care who's the quarterback, right? I bought, it's funny, there was a running back named Joik Bell, who was running back for the Detroit Lions. He had a great story, hardworking kid. He was one of those guys that wasn't necessarily supposed to seat, but he did through, sheer will and everything. And I became a fan of his. Just a really good guy, very good-hearted. He was well-known around Detroit, did a lot of good works. And so my wife bought me a jersey. She knew I had kind of been studying him, liked him. She bought me a jersey of his, right? I have a couple different jerseys from the Lions. She bought me one of his jerseys, And like the next season, Detroit cut him. Just like, that sucks. I mean, it's not like Barry Sanders, right? Where, if you got a Barry Sanders jersey, you wear a Barry Sanders jersey because it's Barry Sanders, right? But it's like Joique Bell. You know what? I'm going to walk around wearing my Joique Bell jersey now and he got cut. But, as much as I liked him, I care more about the well-being, the welfare, if you will, of the Detroit Lions. And so if they needed to let him go in order for the team to do better, I was okay with that. And the nice guy he was, the team wasn't benefiting. And I look at it the same way with America, right? Or your town, your city, the municipal area that you live in, the state. The question is, what are the results? And I look around, once again, I'm driving through Washington, D.C. right now, and it's interesting as I drive through D.C. Once again, all the changes. I just came up 395, and so I'm in Northwest, I guess soon to be, I guess I'll be staying in Northwest the whole time. But just kind of looking and seeing all the changes, and I always kind of wonder, my family has been in and around the D.C. area since like 1988. I got extended family who live here. My sister came here back in 88 to go to Howard University, and let me tell you, in 88, the area around Howard University was rough. I mean, Howard is like the premier HBCU, which is historically black colleges and universities. And if you have questions about HBCUs, why do they exist, so on and so forth, I did a video on it. Go back and look on the Unhyphenated American page. There's a list of videos. You'll see why I talked about why there are, why there are HBCUs. Just reference that. But yeah, Howard is pretty much the premier HBCU. But boy, I remember back in '88, it was in a really, really bad neighborhood, and things have changed tremendously in those neighborhoods now. People would attribute it to gentrification, which is a whole nother story. I should do man, that'd be a great talking about gentrification. But anyway, when you start judging things based off of the results, policies, when you judge politicians, you judge their policies, you judge ideology based on results, man, what a difference it would make. Because it doesn't matter what their rhetoric is, what are they actually doing? And I'm not talking about what are the results like after a year or so, because really, positive change doesn't typically take place until, a good year, 2-3 years after a policy has been implemented. Now, there are some policies that are just stupid and they should never be implemented to begin with. But in many cases, I mean, positive change, growth does not happen immediately. In a lot of cases with government, for example, government is more prone to be a wrecking ball, right? Government can destroy things really quickly, but it takes a long time for government to help improve things. So, that's one of those things I point out all the time. It's like, yeah, you're all excited about this policy, but it's like, what are going to be the actual results of this policy? And I look at the same thing with President Trump. I was just telling somebody about this. It's like, yeah, you got people who are, they're already ridiculing, oh, we're the winning and so on and so forth. And I've studied politics and history enough to know, like what I said, it's not something that happens overnight. That there were a lot of people in the first 2 years or so of Ronald Reagan's presidency who were ridiculing his policies, right? That he had the, they're like, oh, it's trickle-down economics, it doesn't work, so on and so forth, which, by the way, there's no such thing as trickle-down economics. It's supply-side economics. Trickle-down is the label that the left put on it in order to kind of denigrate things. So when you understand that, it's like, there's no such thing as trickle-down economics. But supply-side economics is very real, and that's what works. It actually works. And we know it works because places that use supply-side economics, whether it's on a local level, the state level, or a national level, they all tend to prosper. And it works also because going back to 1984, when Ronald Reagan put a spanking on Jimmy Carter when he won office. But when he ran for re-election in '84 against Walter Mondale, Walter Mondale was Jimmy Carter's former vice president, Ronald Reagan opened up a can of just, he opened up a can, we'll just leave it at that. He opened up a can on Walter Mondale. In fact, if I remember correctly, that, of course, the only two states that he lost, or not states, but he lost the District of Columbia, which in 1984, remember, they used to call D.C. Chocolate City. And a lot of African Americans, in fact, probably most African Americans, are fairly Marxist-minded. So, yeah, that's not surprising that he lost the District of Columbia. And, of course, D.C. in 1984 was not exactly a place you wanted to live anyway, but that's a whole other story. But then he also lost, I think it was Minnesota. It's either Wisconsin or Minnesota. Now I'm drawing a blank. But he was either Wisconsin or Minnesota. And he lost that state by, I think, roughly 3,000 votes. So essentially, he came within 3,000 votes in, it was either Minnesota or Wisconsin, you can look it up yourself, of basically having an electoral college sweep, which was huge. And why did he have that sweep? Because the electorate in 1984 judged Ronald Reagan. They judged his ideology. They judged his policies according to the results. And the results were undeniable. Okay, they were undeniable. And so he won in a landslide. Doesn't even, it's not even an appropriate word to use for how much or how big Ronald Reagan won in 1984. You know, and but you know what's happened? I've noticed it seems like people have, it seems like, especially I saw something on my Instagram feed, and it was saying that this meme, and it was saying that you had a high school that was saying, hey, a high school teacher rather, who was saying, you know, I don't discuss my political beliefs in school because that's unprofessional, right? And then below that, there was a college professor, and he was saying, and the college professor was saying, can anyone tell me what the square root of F Donald Trump is, right? And it's funny, you know, I had to laugh at that because it's so true. That's exactly what they do in colleges now. I mean, like, they've always been leftist, but man, colleges have become leftist indoctrination camps to the nth degree. I mean, literally, it used to be at least that your kids would come out with, you know, more educated, but now your kids are just coming out stupid, you know, and just flat out stupid. They don't know any that our leftist friends are ignorant. It's just that everything they know is wrong, essentially, is what he said. And that's what's happening with these younger people now. Everything they know is wrong. And they're not judging things based off of the merit of their, you know, their beliefs. It's like I had a discussion with several millennials on this weekend, and we were just talking about, like, the environment. Actually, I'm sorry, the discussion, first we were talking about education. And the young lady I was talking to, very sweet young lady, we've known her for a while, just heart of gold. But, you know, you can tell, she's, what, 21, about to graduate from college, you know, from a college in the area. And, you know, she's been indoctrinated. Like, she's talked about, oh, well, you know, the income disparity, and, you know, she wants to be a teacher, and was just saying how things are so different with this college, or the reason why she's one of only a handful of people who made it out of the neighborhood she made it out of is because some people are more privileged than others, and so on and so forth. And the analogy I talked about with her was the NFL, because people always had this belief that if we simply spend more money, that will solve everything. And you've been told that so often, and you just, it sounds fine, right? I mean, it makes sense. Money will solve the problem, right? That's, but then, you know, there's so many examples to show where that's not even the truth. I mean, you can take people who've been on welfare. If they hit the lottery, how long does it take for them to end up broke again? Not long at all, right? Because their thinking is wrong. They don't know how to think. So giving them money doesn't solve their problem. In fact, it causes more problems, and they're soon to end up in worse problems because they don't know how to manage their finances. So what I was explaining to her, I used the analogy of the NFL. And I said, the NFL, I said, in terms of colleges, excuse me, not colleges, but high schools or post, that if you look at the NFL, for example, the NFL goes out of its way to try to have parity, right? Equality. And I explained, I said, they have a salary cap. So it's not like baseball where you can have, was it George Steinbrenner with the Yankees, who will just open up his checkbook and say, hey, you know what? I want all the best players, so I'm going to pay everybody $50 million, or I'm going to have a whole roster and everybody's getting paid $50 million, whatever. That's the kind of stuff that they would do. The NFL doesn't allow that. Everybody has the same, all 32 franchises have the same pool of money to work with, right? So nobody can pay. And now you get to pick and choose how you're going to pay your players. You can be foolish if you want to and pay one player an inordinate amount of money. And of course, you'll be great. You'll have the superstar player, but you'll be weak in these other areas. You can go ahead and do that. But, it's managing your salary cap is an art to science that all NFL teams have to do. And then, and some do it better than others. But then, for example, the second thing that you have to worry about, the second thing the NFL does to kind of have parity, if you will, is that they have the draft. Now think about this for a second, right? Because it could easily be that the best team keeps getting all the best players. Because, look, if you're the best player and you want to win, if you're the best player in college, then naturally you would say, hey, I want to go to the team that just won a Super Bowl. So all the best players would be vying to go to the team that just won a Super Bowl, or at least the team that was a Super Bowl contender. But the NFL doesn't even allow that. The NFL has it set up so that the worst team gets the first pick at the best players. And I was pointing out to her, I said, just follow me with this analogy, and just kind of judging based off of results. I said, follow me with this analogy that the New England Patriots have been to, and I don't care what you think about the Patriots, so, you can just skip me all the stuff about, they're the Cheatriots, whatever like that, whatever. They're going to the Super Bowl. Now, remember, the league is set up so that everybody has access to the same pool of money. Everybody has access to basically the same athletes, and if you're the worst team, you get to pick the best player. And when you look at the way things are set up, the Patriots, for the last, and they average 12 wins a season, every season for the past 14 or 15 years. Which means they haven't picked, they're always like one of the last 4 or 5 teams to pick a new player. Right? So, everything has been set up so that they shouldn't be able to dominate like they do, but yet they do. And what I was pointing out to her, it's the difference in the philosophy that the Patriots have for playing the game of football and for managing their players. And I said, you know what? It's really no different in education. You can sit there and throw more money at the problem, and it's not going to solve the problem, because it's really about the ideology of the people who are involved in managing the school system. It's also about the ideology of the parents, right? You can look at these different schools and look at things like parent-teacher conferences. What is the attendance rate of these different schools with parents showing up at the parent-teacher conference? That is a better indicator of the scores, or just how well the kids will do, than simply how much money the school has. Because once again, I'm driving through Washington, D.C., and D.C. spends a ridiculous amount of money on their schools, and yet, they're not exactly the best schools. So maybe let's talk about how often are parents involved and actively involved in the education of their children. I think that makes a difference. But you have, once again, politicians. Their answer to everything is, we need to spend more money on education. And at some point, you would think the elected, there's more and more tax dollars going towards education. Show me the money. Show me the return on the investment, actually, is probably more accurate. What has been my return on the investment? And nothing. In fact, I wrote another article, and you can find it once again on the Unhyphenated America page. It's called Mighty Joe Clark versus the Educational Industrial Complex. And I talk about the stats with what's happened with education in America. Education spending going back to the Eisenhower era, when he was, he made the pronouncement about, hey, we need to be mindful of the military-industrial complex gaining undue influence. And at that point, if I remember correctly, the military-industrial complex was consuming roughly 50% of the federal budget. And Ike is still one of my favorite U.S. presidents. He was, he wasn't quite a conservative. He was pretty much a moderate Republican. But, he's still one of my favorites. Just that, it was a peacetime. He kept the nation. But when you really look at it, if you were to look at what he had to say and then compare it to today, instead of being concerned about the military-industrial complex, we really should be looking at the education-industrial complex, because back in 1950, our military was strong. Our military was a force that was respected and feared, if you will, and our education system was doing quite well. I mean, the kids who were in the education system at that time went on. That's DC potholes for you. The kids who were in the education system at that time went on to, be the people who were part of NASA, right? Putting a man on the moon. So our education system was doing just fine back then. But then they decided to get the federal government more involved and increase spending, right? Because, hey, that makes sense. Let's just increase the spending. More is always better, right? No, it's not. It's just not. Not with things like education. And actually, it's not even so much more spending, it's more government involvement. Right? That was the problem, is getting more government involvement in education at the higher level at the federal government is not beneficial. So we start judging those things. You look, and you'll see ever since I think it was Eisenhower who broke out who created the Department of all right, signal got a little weak there. Hopefully it's better now. All right, let's try it. Hopefully, sorry for that, folks. You're in the nation's capital, the District of Columbia. So, like I said, just we spent all that money, and really, nothing got better. So just as I study those things, I'm always weary of government saying we should spend more or have more federal involvement. Once again, government is always best when it governs least, and it's best when it governs at closest level to where the situation is. So with education, education should stay local, and at most at the state level. Definitely shouldn't have the federal government involved. Nothing has gotten better. So like I said, Ike, if I remember correctly, created the Health and Human Services and Wellness, or whatever the name of the agency was at that time. But then, of course, it was Jimmy Carter in 1979 who broke it out and became the separate Department of Education. If you can look at all the stats, the quality of education, judging by test scores, but then also compared to the rest of the world, education has not improved in the United States since 1979. Spending has gone up dramatically. Performance, not so much. So this is the kind of stuff when you should be saying, hey, you know what? let's judge politicians, let's judge ideology, let's judge policies according to their actual results. What a novel concept. And if you did that, if you do that, you would vote to remove the federal government from education completely. But see, now there's been so many little fiefdoms that have been created that, boy, that'll be like, getting a dog off of a bone, right? They're going to fight you. But whether it's education or anything else like that, there's so many things. If you just stop and think about it, run the numbers, just do your due diligence, look at these things, and you'll see it's like, wow, nothing has gotten better. That's the sad thing, is nothing has gotten better. And I had posted on my personal page talking about if leftist ideology worked, I use the term African American. When I say African American, I don't like that term, but I use it for argument's sake. But I said if leftist ideology actually worked, then the African American community, the families would be more stable and the communities would be more prosperous. But can anybody honestly say that the African American community has stable families and prosperous communities? No, it's not true. Doesn't happen. Hasn't happened. Why? Because leftist ideology, and especially the public policies, suck. They don't work. I mean, we have been the community of descendants of slaves sold from Africa and brought to America, have been the guinea pigs for all forms of leftist ideology, and ain't nothing worked, man. Nothing's gotten any better. And it's a shame that, you look at, I was driving through here, D.C., an area that, D.C. was known as Chocolate City. And let's just be honest, while it was Chocolate City, it was run down. Now what's happening, and that's another topic, gentrification. I have to laugh because I see people, black folks, complaining about gentrification. And I point out to them, it's like, do you realize that it's not like right-wing conservatives who are moving into these urban areas? It's leftist, regressive, socialist-minded yuppies, white yuppies. White yuppie Democrats who are moving into these urban areas and essentially displacing, African-American Democrats. I mean, when you look at the registered voters in the District of Columbia, it's still like 90% Democrat. So, I mean, I just have to laugh at, your cousin and them, as I call them. Like, why are you mad at, conservative blacks and white conservatives? They're not gentrifying your neighborhoods. It's well-to-do, white Democrats. And they kicking y'all out. Oh man, that's a whole topic for another another discussion. But yeah, it just blows my mind on that. But once again, they're the ones who are moving in and creating these policies. They're the ones who are working the system and in bed with government, and they're making it happen. Taxes are going up, and so people who live there can't afford to live there anymore. And whose fault is that? I mean, seriously, is it white Republicans' fault? You're mad at white folks in Iowa, right? No, it had nothing to do with it. It's white Democrats who did it all. And guess what? It's also Marxist-minded African-American Democrats like the Congressional Black Caucus. Whether it's here in the District of Columbia, whether it's in Detroit, whether it's in Harlem, all those places where you see gentrification taking place, guess what? Those areas are represented in Congress by Congressional Black Caucus members. The mayors of those cities are almost all black. City council members are almost all black. And they're working with white Democrats to improve the areas but black folks aren't benefiting from it. And somehow you're blaming white Republicans and, of course, Uncle Tom sellouts like myself, right? You know, because I'm an Uncle Tom sellout because I don't have a D after my name, you know. But I'm sitting there analyzing these things and trying to tell y'all what's really going on, and you don't want to hear it because you're so busy calling me an Uncle Tom sellout. But once again, you're not learning how to judge things righteously. You know, you're not judging the politicians, you're not judging their ideology, and you're not judging their results, their policies rather, based on the actual results. Because you're emotionally involved instead of, you know, analyzing it from a mental standpoint. So anyway, I've been rambling long enough. I gotta go. Good talking to you guys. And we'll catch up another time. Take care. God bless.